Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome to Thoughts, Comments, Opinions. Our guest today is Roisin O'Donnell. This will be the last in our series of Irish writers taken from the Young Islanders anthology as published by New Island Books. If you haven't picked up a copy, please do. The whole reason that I've interviewed Dave Lord and the editor, Ellen McMonigal, and Roisin O'Donnell, who you'll hear today, as guests, is that I truly think that this is one of the most incredible anthologies of short stories I have ever read. Somewhere on this, on the written bits around this podcast, you'll see a link to the review. So please pick up a copy. And with that said, do listen to the end because I welcome your comments, and I'll be letting you know about some of the guests we have coming up. But in the meanwhile, sit back, relax, fire up a podtini, and listen to the words as they fly through the air. Good afternoon or good evening, depending what time you happen to be listening to this. Tonight on the podcast, we're continuing our series with Irish writers with Roisin O'Donnell. Roisin contributed a story I absolutely love. It reminded me of an Irish Dorothy Parker. The story is called How to Learn Irish in 17 Steps, and we'll be talking to her about her career, her other writing, and how she came to Ireland. Roisin, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me, Hubert. It's great to be here.
My pleasure entirely. Whereabouts in Ireland are you?
I'm in Dublin, in the north of Dublin.
Very good. And now, even though your name could not be more Irish if it came with shamrocks attached, you weren't born here.
No, I was actually born in the north of England, in Sheffield. Both my parents are from Derry, and they left the north before I was born, and myself and my sister grew up in the north of England, and then we moved to live in Dublin then when I was 18. So I've moved around the place a good bit, but I've always identified as being Irish.
Yeah, we actually have a strange sort of similarity. My grandmother's people were from Belfast, and she was born in Sheffield. Oddly enough, yeah. So blades or owls, as nobody in North America will have the slightest clue what we're talking about.
Yeah, not many people outside Sheffield would know what you were talking about there. The two football teams, yeah.
Yeah. I know. One in the first division and one in the second, but we'll be back. But, I gather from the short biography in Young Islanders that you've also taught, and you've taught overseas.
I have, yes.
Tell me about it.
When I graduated from Trinity, I taught abroad in a few different places, Spain and Malta, and I spent a while in Brazil as well. As you probably gathered from the story, the main character is Brazilian.
I wondered that too. Yeah, because we'll be talking about the story. When I spoke to the editor of Young Islanders, Dave Lord, the other day, and he told me that he chose the writers to contribute to the anthology, and you were assigned the task of writing a story about contemporary Ireland. What would you like the listening audience to know about the story, and how did you come to choose this particular theme? And then after that, I'll have you read a bit of it.
Okay, well, yeah, when Dave asked me to write something about contemporary Ireland, I knew straight away I wanted it to somehow be an exploration of Irishness, really, which I suppose I've always had quite a complicated relationship with, having grown up in England, but I always identified myself as Irish with having Irish parents. and then I moved to Ireland when I was 18. And it was kind of a funny experience, having always identified as being Irish. Suddenly I had people asking, which part of England are you from? Because I'd hear and presume that I was English.
I've always got,
And
so where in America are you from? I'm from Canada, damn it. But
so there you go. So for me, Irishness has never been a given. It's always been something I suppose I felt I had to justify somehow. And this was all very much encapsulated when a few years ago I found myself in the bizarre position of having to learn the Irish language from scratch as an adult. For my job. I was working as a teacher at the time, and it was really an experience which forced me, I suppose, to confront my feelings about Irishness and my own sort of identity. And it was really an experience that has stayed with me through the years. So when Dave asked me then to write a story that would somehow explore an aspect of contemporary Ireland, I was reminded of that experience of learning Irish, and I knew immediately that that's what I wanted to do in this story. I suppose I thought it would be something a little bit different as well, which perhaps hadn't been explored that much before. So that was the angle I came in at.
It's a wonderful story.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, truly, yeah, about a Portuguese immigrant woman, who's married and an Irish musician named Sean, and it's witty and it's warm and it's just absolutely everything you want in a piece of short fiction. Would you like to read an excerpt from it so I don't have to think of smart questions?
Okay, I'll give you a break for a few minutes. Okay, well, I'm going to start reading. As you know, the story is called How to Learn Irish in 17 Steps. I'm actually going to start reading, I'll just read one of the steps. This is step 8. So just to give the listeners maybe a little bit of background, the main character is called Luana, and she's from Sao Paulo in Brazil. And as you mentioned, she's moved to Ireland really because of her husband, who's Sean, who's Irish, and she's having to learn Irish because of her job. She's a primary teacher, and it's a requirement. So at this point in the story, Luana has just found out that to pass her Irish exams, she actually has to spend some time in the Gaeltacht. So this is what happens. Step 8. Whisper a prayer to Sal Cristavo as you scrape the snow from your windscreen. Sean will watch from the doorway while you cram the boot of your micra. Pack the fluffy blue Foxford your mother-in-law gave you, an AA road map, a backpack bulging with woolly jumpers, Is Fader Lynn, a 3-pack of notebooks, your green weatherproof coat, a Tupperware box of powdered queijo from Gabriella, and your last packet of Fandango's crisps. Sean will fold his arms and mutter, "Ridiculous! How the hell do you think you're going to learn Irish, babe? Waste of money. You'll probably get lost anyway. Stupid idea." Click the boot shut and throw your arms around his neck. "I'll miss you." He will pull away and mutter, "For God's sake, Luana, mind out for black ice." Notice the coldness of his ferret-like eyes, the fact that he's wearing a Rootless Drifters t-shirt embossed with a logo of his own face, the girlishness of his hand with its long guitar-strumming nails. Wonder why you never noticed these things before. Love and hate morph with the suddenness of a Sao Paulo nightfall. Program your Pathfinder 98 and head west on the M4 through the flat expanse of the Midlands. Bypass Galway City and continue through the outlying towns of Moycullen and Uachtarard. Turn off the main Clifton Road onto a narrow winding track signposted the Gaeltacht. Follow the road as it weaves and curves around every ditch and bog, but do not pay too much attention to the road directions you were given by the secretary at Colosh de Loch Conula. These directions will not take you anywhere near the place you're trying to reach. After 2 hours of driving in desperate circles around the wilds of County Galway, realise that your destination isn't even on the map. Disconnect your Pathfinder 98 and shove it into the glove compartment. As daylight fades, get out of your car and slam the door. Your breath will fog in the freezing air. Shout at a few uninterested sheep. sense the hostile glare of this grey-green land in which you will forever be a foreigner. Cover your face with your hands. Remember the country you left behind, Isla de Anchieta, where big-eyed spider-monkeys perform acrobatics in the palms. Waves crashing on the soft white sand of Caraguatatuba, your mama's hands. All of this you abandoned for a love as fleeting as quickly browning acai blossoms. Pick up a rock and sling it into the mutilated darkness of the bog. Get back into your car. Your bluish hands will be shivering on the steering wheel. How do you say perdido in Irish? Kiss your touchy necklace. Do a U-turn and judder back up the potholed limestone track. A snow-blotched sheet of bog will stretch for miles before it creases around the edges of the Atlantic. Yellow gorse bushes will be bright splashes on the tawny landscape. Gnarled branches of hawthorn trees will lean sideways as if caught in a perpetual storm. Locate the whitewashed farmhouse just as darkness has begun to drape across the rugged shoulders of the Loch Conula hills.
Fantastic.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm glad you picked that passage because it includes a couple of points in the story that I really like. First, you wrote it in what is perhaps the trickiest tense. You wrote it in present tense. Did you find it tricky to write in that?
When the idea for the story came to me, funnily enough, it was always in that tense, kind of the structure and the idea came to me in the one go, which, as you know yourself, it's not always the case. Sometimes you have the idea for a story and then you end up changing the structure then as you go along. But with this story, I always had this idea of doing it in almost the form of a set of instructions, almost mimicking an instruction manual.
Indeed,
and what I was really hoping to do here was to sort of play around with the idea of language learning. The idea of language is something that can be learned out of a set of instructions, when actually, as the story progresses, there's often a real breakdown of language, a breakdown of communication, and the characters sort of experience this feeling that at the crucial moments language is often useless and true meaning kind of lies in between the words. So
yes.
that was the idea that I was playing around with, and really I just felt that was maybe the only form that could really express that. So I didn't find it too hard in that way.
I love what you said about learning between the words. I've dined out on this story for years, but the one course that I've always urged everybody to take is linguistics, because you learn everything about people but by understanding language. So
right.
Yeah. Our prof, it was a third year course in my BA year. He pointed out something really important, that if we didn't have silence in between words, language would be incomprehensible. You know?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're often listening as much for what people don't say as what they say.
Indeed,
And
yeah.
for me, as well, the other idea would be sort of this concept of language, the carrier of culture. And in the story, Luana's process of learning Irish is also this process of becoming Irish and assimilating it into the culture. For me, when I started learning the Irish language, that was something that I found really, really interesting, was the way that sort of so much of Irish culture would be sort of encapsulated in the language, certain phrases and just the way that things are worded.
Did you find it wickedly tough to learn? Because I am.
You're learning it at the moment,
I am.
are you?
I
Yes,
am.
yeah. It is difficult. Yes, yeah, it is difficult to learn.
I
Um,
downloaded the Irish course from RTE, and for people who don't know, RTE is the national broadcaster of Ireland. So fine. I thought, well, if I'm going to live here, and I wanted to live here from the time I was 10, and I thought, well, I'd best learn another language, even though I think 9 out of the first 10 people, 10 Irish people I mentioned this to said, what do you want to learn that for? you know,
Yeah,
but I did anyway.
it's
I'm
ironic. Yes.
determined. So I kid you not, Rasheen, in the very first lesson, these are out of say 10. Here are 3 out of the 10 phrases that one must know in Irish.
Okay.
First was, "Can I get you a cup of tea?" Se- Second
That's
is,
very important.
"Oh yes." The second is, "The weather is terrible." And the third is, "This is not the employment office." This is what you need to know to live in Ireland.
That's survival Irish.
Indeed.
Yes.
Indeed, yes. Now, I'm in the west of Ireland, and I rarely hear Irish spoken. Do you hear much of it in Dublin?
You wouldn't really on in everyday life, day to day. It's walking around the streets in Dublin. You wouldn't hear much Irish, but there would be certain places. I mean, in the story, the character goes to a conversation class in a pub, which it's a bit of a disaster in the story. But in real life, there would be a thriving sort of Irish conversation scene, and so you would, if you seek it out, you can find places where Irish is spoken. And we'd have also, for example, like an Irish TV station and Irish radio station. So I
Yes.
know when I was learning Irish, I tried to kind of tune into Irish radio and TV. I tried to listen to as much Irish as possible just to kind of get a feel for it. I think the pronunciation is probably the hardest part.
The decoding from written to oral. Like, okay, so is the T pronounced, or the H or the N? Like those are the tricky letters for me.
Those are tricky, yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a moment in the story which, and like this would be based on real life, when the character is in the Gaeltacht and she's in the classroom, and the teacher is reeling off Irish phrases like incantations, and the character is desperately trying to be a good student and make notes, but she realizes that she can't actually spell anything in Irish.
Yep.
At that moment, she takes out her phone and tries to Google spelling patterns in Irish, but of course, there's no internet signal. And just this moment of sort of despair, really. And that would have been something that I certainly experienced a couple of times on the way to learning Irish.
Oh, I'm sure. The other thing, and it shows up in that excerpt, about the journey within the journey,
Yeah,
and feeling lost in it. I also noticed when I first read it that you had a wonderful little connective phrase that binds the story together. How do you say blank in Irish? Was
yeah.
that something that got added in afterwards, or did it just naturally occur in the
Uh,
writing of the story?
Yeah, I think that kind of worked its way in as the story went on. It wouldn't have been in the first draft, but certainly kind of came into later drafts. I suppose the way I see it anyway is that this is the questions that are going on in Luana's head, in the character's head, and these kind of express, I suppose, her moments of frustration or just bewilderment. And I felt that was important just to illustrate that. For me, one of the key questions that she poses is towards the end, when she says, "How do you say I'm lost in Irish? How do you say I'm confused in Irish? How do you say how you really feel in any language?" And that's, I suppose, coming back to the point you made earlier about language, is perhaps the key thing that I wanted to really explore in the story.
Yeah, and it binds together like a piece of poetry in that way. As I say,
Oh,
when I read your story, I was absolutely blown away by it.
oh,
With the wit and the warmth, and the story, and I won't give it away, but the story of the marriage of Luana and Sean and so forth. I mean,
Yeah. Believe
so
it or not, that actually came into sort of later drafts. The idea of the kind of the love story
oh
in the
really now?
yeah, yeah. To start off with, I suppose I was thinking about my own experience of learning Irish, and it was maybe a little bit more autobiographical, and I was really just focusing on this character learning Irish. But sometimes the problem is that if a story is just purely autobiographical, it can be a little bit dry. It might not be that interesting. And I decided I wanted to change the story a bit and really to give the character a real motivation for learning Irish. I felt like she really needed a strong reason for learning Irish apart from just the job. So then this idea, of course, of the love story is giving her the reason for learning Irish came in then.
Well, that's wise too, because it reminds me, and uh, I'll ask you for yours, but the best piece of writing advice that I ever ran across was in one of Graham Greene's autobiographies.
Yeah.
And Greene played fast and loose with the truth all the time. But on this one, I think he probably was being factual, and he said that in writing a piece of fiction, take a scene that you've lived in your own life and change one detail.
Yeah.
And that spurs the imagination. So transference
Yeah.
of your experience
Mm.
to an immigrant from Brit, Brit, Brazil, I imagine, did that process for you.
That's, I think, yes, and I think just taking that step of making the character from a very different culture from myself just allowed me to have a bit of distance from the story, which
Yeah.
made it easier to write. I wasn't writing from my own perspective anymore. I was taking on this character, which I think really gave the story a new lease of life. Yeah, but that's good advice. Yes.
Yeah. I've always liked that one. So when did you realize that? Oh, damn it! I'm doomed to become a writer.
Oh, it's funny, but I've always, I mean, since I can remember, since I was a very young child, I've really always wanted to write. I was always, my parents always encouraged me. I think my mum had me enrolled in the library when I was about 3 weeks old. I think, I think I was possibly one of the youngest library members ever. And just all through my childhood, it sounds cheesy to say, but when I was, as young as sort of, 7 or 8, and other kids wanted to be doctors and nurses, I wanted to be a writer. And I think I had a real sense of being a writer as a job. I perhaps had a clearer sense of what it meant back then than I do now. Even, a doctor's job was to make people better, and a writer's job was to write good stories, and that was it. I loved reading good stories, and I wanted to write them myself. So, I've always sort of had that in mind, and I wrote all through my teens and 20s. Wrote a couple of terrible novels, which I
Yes, we all have
had, we all have some of
had those
those.
well buried.
Yes, but I think that's all part of the learning process as well.
Sure it is.
And so I yeah, that was just certainly part of the process for me anyway. And then moved on to short stories, and short stories for me were just a real revelation. In that you can explore a theme and a topic in a relatively short number of words, and then sort of move on to something else. It gives you a chance to experiment with different characters, different ideas, without, I suppose, committing yourself to whatever it takes, a year or 2 years to write a novel.
Yeah, I really love the form. It tends to get short shrift in North America in that if you're a short
That's,
story writer, people come up to you at cocktail parties and say, "Oh, so you weren't able to finish the novel then?" They don't get credit.
that's, and yet there's some of the best short story writers in the world. People like Flannery O'Connor, and that's are from the States.
I know, I know.
So contradiction there.
It may be the death of magazines printing them, or who knows what. But I'm delighted that they're alive and well, and and living in Ireland.
Yes, it's great to see.
It is. So I alluded to this before. What's the best piece of writing advice that you've received, or what piece of wisdom would you care to pass along to the listeners?
Okay, well, I think one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given is actually from Dave Lorden, who you spoke to the other day.
Yeah.
Dave is a great writer himself, and he's also a brilliant teacher, and he's been a great mentor to me, and just an absolute inspiration and encouragement. And Dave has given me many gems of advice, but one of the things that really stands out is that he said to me once, "There's writing is a process. Think, write, rewrite." People think that the two at the end, think and rewrite, are smaller parts of the equation, and that the writing is the main part, but actually it's each of them are equally important, and just to give equal time to your thinking and your rewriting. And I mean, that's just been invaluable, really, for me.
How do you know when a story's done?
How do you know when it's done?
Yeah.
Well, I've heard it said it's never done, it's just abandoned.
Yeah.
At a certain point. Well, I think when you get to the stage where you're reading over your story and you're just taking commas out and putting them back in again, that's when you know that it's done.
I'll tell you a terrible joke that I came up with years ago.
Yeah.
Shakespeare is dug up from his grave, and the great bard is alive again. So of course, he's brought to the recreation of the Globe Theatre on the South Bank, and there's Hamlet. And look, here's your greatest play, and isn't it wonderful how it's lived for 500 years? And Shakespeare sits back and he watches the performance, and
Yeah.
everybody's enthralled, and they ask him, "So what did you think?" And Shakespeare says, "One more rewrite."
Yeah.
Because we're
That's
all
very
like
true.
that,
Yeah, you're never quite happy. You always look and see something that you would like to change. But I think there is also a danger of over editing.
Oh, I know.
I heard Kevin Barry actually talking about this at a Stinging Fly event not that long ago, and he was saying that he would of course do several drafts of stories, but he was saying he might do 10 drafts, but then he'll never throw away his early drafts, and he often finds it won't be draft 10, it might be draft 7 that's actually the best one.
I know.
It's interesting to hear him saying that.
Indeed, indeed. I find it both when I'm reviewing novels and editing writers that a lot of times that first chapter will get so worked and worked and worked and worked and worked to death that it's almost better to tear it out and start on chapter 2.
Right, you actually noticed that. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I think what
truly.
can happen as well is it's very easy to kind of edit the humor out of something. I've noticed
Yes.
that with stories where you get to draft 10 and you realize, hang on a minute, this isn't funny anymore. And you
Yeah.
have to actually go back to your earlier drafts and say, okay, those parts that kind of seemed a little bit messy and rough around the edges, that was actually where the life was, where the humour was, and you want to put that back in again, because I think that can give a real lift to a story as well. And I know the humour was certainly an important aspect of How to Learn Irish.
Yes, and I will bet my bottom dollar that during the writing of it, you must have laughed out loud at your own stuff and thought, where did that come from?
I don't know. It was pretty funny, some of the sort of memories that of my own journey of learning Irish. Yeah, yeah. Some of the sort of scenarios that emerged in the story.
So, where can the listeners find more of your writing over and beyond the Young Islanders an, an anthology?
Okay. Well, I'm published in a few different anthologies at the moment, and journals. I have another story coming out in September in an anthology called The Long Gaze Back, which is an anthology of Irish women writers, which has been
Wonderful.
edited by Sinead Gleeson. So I'm very excited about that. There will be writers in there from Anne Enright and Mary Costello, going back then to writers like Elizabeth Bowen, Maria Edgeworth, and then more sort of newcomer writers like myself. So that's one to keep a lookout for.
Yes, indeed,
And
and
looking
I look forward to it.
Yes, that's. I mean, it's a real honour to be included in something like that, and then looking ahead to next year, I'm actually having my debut collection published by New Island.
Fantastic! Oh,
Yes, in
congratulations!
2016. So that's
Ah, that is great for you. Um, the last thing that I often do in these interviews is what I call the last 2 minutes. It again avoids me having to think of smart questions, and I just throw it open to the guest. You can talk about anything. You can talk about writing, the Irish weather, absolutely anything at all that you'd like to talk about. And it doesn't have to be 2 minutes. It could be one. It could be 15. I don't care. But the time is yours, Roisin.
right. Okay, gosh, that's that's putting me on the spot there. I suppose something maybe just to mention it is the idea, again, coming back to the idea of Irishness is something that I've explored in a few different stories. As I said, How to Learn Irish in 17 Steps, it's really about kind of Luana's process of becoming Irish. Something that really interests me, I suppose, is the idea that you can be Irish American, you can be Afro American, you can be Latin American, but like for example, can you be Afro Irish, Latin Irish, or Brazilian Irish? Well, of course you can, of course you can, but that's something that I feel hasn't really been addressed that much in Irish literature so far. So what I'm really interested in exploring is the global Irish experience. I suppose partly my interest in this comes from working in the school in sort of North Dublin, where say at least 90% of the kids, their parents would have been born outside of Ireland, and these kids themselves would of course identify as Irish. And I found this really interesting to see this mixture of cultures, and I suppose what's being referred to as the new Irish. I think it's a very exciting time to be a writer in Ireland, and that the definition of what it means to be Irish is evolving and developing, and that's something that I've been exploring in my fiction quite a bit recently, and that'll be sort of reflected in the collection as well, I think.
Fantastic. Yeah, our little moss-covered island is a pretty wonderful place to live in. Our guest has been Roisin O'Donnell. As you've heard, she has a collection coming out in the spring of 2016, the New Island Press. And if you'd like to read some of her work now, I do urge you to pick up the Young Islanders anthology as published by New Island Press. Roisin, thank you ever so much for
Thank you
your
very much,
book.
Stuart. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. And I'd like to thank Roisin O'Donnell once again for being our guest today on Thoughts, Comments, and Opinions. Coming up, we have an interesting selection of guests. Over the next few days, you'll be listening to Jay Biswas talking about fantasy football, the National Football League. See, it's not all high culture around here, folks. Then we have Una Langford, who is a talented oil and acrylic painter. She'll be discussing her work and educating people as artists. And coming up next week, what I'm really looking forward to, an old friend, one of the first people I ever met when I came to Ireland, Combe Jackson. Combe photographed all the big rock stars of the 1980s, but he gave up a life of crime, and now he's a landscape photographer, an incredibly talented one. So, thank you so much for listening, and as always, from all of us who work the late shift, good night, everybody.